Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Robb Stark. Robb scratched his jaw, wondering what in the blazes his enemy was doing. Thousands of whites stood on the snowy terrain below, doing absolutely nothing. They simply stared at the wall and the shattered remains of the first gate, as if they were waiting for something to happen. To Robb and his commanders, it was all very perplexing. Their role was to anticipate what their enemy would do, then make a plan to counter it. When the enemy does nothing, it makes planning for what they might do a lot harder. Robb's soldiers didn't share his worries. They were unleashing the seven hells upon the army of the undead with arrows, oil, and rocks. Dozens of whites were being destroyed every minute, though none even flinched, as their fellow blue-eyed demons were killed. "What in the blazes are they doing, Highsmith?" Lord Tarly grunted to the Green Man. Robb glanced at the leader of the Green Men. Besides the army of undead, the Bren Highsmith was someone that Robb also worried about. When the young monarch had caught sight of the man that morning, as they were breaking their fast, he looked terrible. His eyes were rimmed with red, showing a lack of sleep, and his face was as pale as snow. There was a tired, almost defeated air around him, which Robb found both odd and troubling. The Green Man leaned on his spear. "The wall was made with magic, Lord Tarly. The whites, nor their master, can pass under it." A few of Robb's commanders nodded. That made sense to them. However, neither Robb nor Lord Tarly seemed to agree entirely with the Green Man. "But they can pass over it," Robb pointed out. "That's why some keep trying to climb the wall." The Green Man nodded. "The wall is several hundred feet high and extends from shore to shore, but it is not perfect. The magic that was bestowed upon the blocks of ice does not extend further. So the enemy could theoretically get around us," Father said. The Green Man nodded. "Yes, but whites don't swim. To freeze a lake is one thing. To freeze the sea is a power that not even the Great Darkness has. Even if it could, it would begin a war with the drowned god, something that it would not risk when it is already at war with the old gods." Robb tugged on his beard. "The drowned god has gone after my family once already. We'll double the guard at the gates, and prepare for the worst," he ordered. "They're waiting for something, and it has to be coming from our side." "Could the others have any sort of allies south of the wall?" Lord Royce asked, lending his voice to the conversation. After Krister's death, it was said that he gave up the boys birthed by his daughter wives to the others. Mance suggested, "Probably how the damn things repopulated so quickly over the past few years." "Who's Krister?" Jimmy asked. "A free folk man who married his daughters," Father explained briefly. "He was occasionally an ally to the Watch, but mainly stayed neutral." He nodded to Mance. "You make a good point, Mance. His sons are probably the reason why the others are attacking now. If the others have to be grown like any other being, why waste time on stealing a child when Krister gives up his own?" "Krister may have been a worshipper of the others," the Green Man said, "but the others are incapable of working together with anyone other than their own kind. At best, Krister would have died last, but he would have died all the same. So if an attack comes from the south, it'll be led by another," Lord Tarly summarized. "What do the others have to do to break the wall's magic?" Jamie asked before shaking his head. "Can't believe I asked that." The Green Man shook his head. "I don't know. The magic used on the wall is ancient. There are none alive among the children who would know it." "What about greenseers?" Mance Raider asked. "Once they're bonded with a heart tree, then they live forever, don't they?" The Green Man shook his head again. "Greenseers can live for a very long time, yes, but the building of the wall was over 8,000 years ago. No child can live that long, not even with the help of the old gods." "Why wasn't any knowledge passed down?" Lord Royce asked. "The coming of the Andals messed everything up, didn't it?" Robb said grimly. "They slaughtered dozens of the children of the forest before any knowledge they had of the wall could be passed down." "Unfortunately," the Green Man nodded. "Winterfell might have some records of the event." Amy tried helpfully. "After all, it was your ancestor that built this blood thing." Father shook his head. "You would be right, but Winterfell was torched by Rose Bolton's bastard during the war." "What about the Grand Maester?" Lord Royce said. "Is it a possibility that he read something?" "He would have mentioned it," Lord Tarly grumbled. "What's done is done," Robb said, bringing the conversation to a close. "Lord Tarly, you have your orders." "Highsmith, ready the children of the forest." I hope their agility and stature will come in handy if the courtyard is turned into a battlefield. Jaime, gather our best shots and put them at the gate and anywhere else. They'll have a vantage point. Lord Royce, make sure that every man is equipped with dragonglass at all times. Same with the archers. Mance, check the reinforcements on the southern gate. Father, make sure our eastern and western flanks are secure. The last thing I want is all our eyes on the south as they're clambering over our eastern wall. What about Daenerys and Jon? Father asked. Jon will patrol south of the wall while Daenerys and Drogon destroy as many as they can north of the wall. While they're standing there doing fuck all, Robb replied. I will make sure they're told. How long have they been standing there? Lord Tarly asked. Robb shook his head. I'm not sure. Why? If their nightly routine is almost over then, we'll have more time to prepare. Lord Tarly suggested. Good thinking, Robb said. Take the night and the morning to prepare. Have the men stand ready at 5 afternoon. That's about the time the others begin their attack. Robb's commanders all bowed before leaving. Line break. Robb was reaching for his sword as soon as he heard the banging on his door. It was the knock of a man who was terrified and given their current predicament. Robb could only guess that something had happened that involved the others. When he opened the door, the soldier's wide-eyed look was all Robb needed to see to know that something had happened. They're here, Your Grace, the soldier said, trying hard to keep his voice under control as he spoke. Robb nodded and immediately turned towards the wall. But before he could even take a step, he felt a firm hand grab him by the shoulder and turn him around. When he turned, he came face to face with his father, whose face was like stone. They're coming from the south, Robb, he said grimly. It's daytime though, Robb said as he drew his sword. Father shook his head. They switched their timing. The past 6 months have been a ruse. Robb could only nod as he and his father exited the tower and into an active courtyard. Men were rushing around, grabbing weapons, and taking up positions. Archers stood in packs on landings and walkways, the staircases leading to them protected by shield walls and a bristling hedge of spears. The bulk of Robb's infantry formed ranks in front of the gate. Lord Tarly's voice boomed over the courtyard, ordering men to ranks. Do you still have men watching the east and west? Robb asked. Father shook his head. Tarly's called them all to the front. Robb grimaced until he caught sight of Brienne and the rest of his Kingsguard walking up to him, looking ready for a fight. When they reached him, the elite warriors put fists to their chests and bowed to him. Command us, Your Grace, Brienne said. Brienne, take 30 men and defend the eastern wall if the enemy attacks. Sarah Obar, do the same with the western wall. Robb ordered. The rest of you are with me. As his 2 guards ran off, Robb grabbed an ironwood shield from the armory before joining his master of war at the gate. Tarly had his Valyrian steel greatsword unsheathed and held point down in the snow as he continued to call for men to ready themselves. Lord Tarly, I take it the enemy has been spotted, Robb said as he approached. Our sentries spotted them in the trees, Tarly replied. Mance Raider has control of the archers atop the wall. I have a messenger standing by the winch in case we need reinforcements. Our best warriors are in place around the courtyard. We're as prepared as we can be. I sent 2 of my Kingsguard with 30 men each to defend the eastern and western walls in case the enemy tries to overwhelm us on all sides, Robb said. Where will you be, my lord? I mean to stand on the winch platform and direct the defenses if possible, Lord Tarly said. I will strike where I can. What of yourself, Your Grace? Robb shrugged his shield into a better position. I will stay here on the front lines with the men, he replied before looking over his shoulder at the assembled soldiers. If that's all right with you lot? One soldier grinned. Always wanted to rub shoulders with royalty, he chuckled. We'd be honored to stand with you, Your Grace. Lord Tarly merely nodded. I trust your judgment, Your Grace. The 2 warriors clasped arms for a moment, each knowing that this battle would ultimately show whether or not future plans could be made, and what may happen should the enemy north of the wall break through. See you on the other side, Robb said firmly, before Tarly strode off, and Robb took his place in the shield wall, his remaining 3 Kingsguard on his left, right, and behind him. Robb glanced over at Cerebalin, who had changed out his Morning Star for a mace that was spiked with dragonglass. Time to see if this Valyrian steel armor was worth all the fuss, Robb said with a grim smile. He wore the scale armor over a padded shirt, cinched at his wrists with leather cuffs sewn with ringmail. Thick leather covered his shoulders, completing the set. The scale shirt reached down to his mid-thigh and felt no heavier than a cotton shirt. "Ask me at the end of the battle, your grace," Ser Balon replied, returning the smile. "Here they come," an archer called from atop the gate, as archers began to fire on the enemy. A chill ran down Robb's spine. Besides the sound of bowstrings, there were no other sounds of battle. There were no tramping feet or battle cries, save from his own men. A few captains bellowed orders, directing the archers' fire, but it was completely quiet on the other side of the gate. Ratial let out an ear-shattering roar as he swooped down. When he was close enough, Robb heard his brother bellow a word in a language he didn't recognize. Immediately fire spewed from the dragon's maw and engulfed the enemy. The men saw this and pounded their shields, cheering for Rhaegal and Jon. Still, despite the arrows and dragon fire, the sudden pounding at the gate caused Robb and his men to take a step back. The young monarch quickly composed himself, fighting against the fear that filled his stomach. "Hold," he roared, raising his sword and shield. "We have nothing to fear from these bastards. Let's show them what it means to have breath in our lungs and blood in our veins. Let's show them what it means to have life." Robb's men roared their approval, and the wavering wall of shields became a solid barrier of steel, wood, and flesh. Spears were lowered and swords were readied. "Bang! Bring it down," the captain ordered, pointing his sword at whatever was hitting the gate. A couple of archers fired, but it seemed to have no effect.
"It's not fucking dying?"
An archer shouted back, loosing an arrow. "Bang! Aim for its bloody head." Another shouted, "Watch out! They're climbing the wall! Keep them off the walkway." The captain bellowed, grabbing a spear and shoving it at something on the wall. Bang! "You're almost through." "Hold firm," Robb shouted. "Whatever comes through that gate, we'll meet it head on. Remember what we're fighting for. Remember who we're fighting for." The gate came apart in a splintering crack as the undead giant forced its way through. Tattered fur studded with arrow shafts, and its blue eyes burning with unbridled hate. Even Robb was struck for a moment as he took in every gruesome detail of the creature. Rotten, sinewy flesh covered its face, and ice clung to its hair and beard. Humanoid feet dug into the snowy ground as it let out a silent bellow. However, before it could finish its call, it staggered as a spear pierced the side of its head, sliding in one ear and lodging in its brain. "Fucker." Tormund Giantsbane shouted, drawing his sword and dragonglass dagger. A wave of wights swarmed through the broken gate, climbing over their dead comrade as they rushed towards Robb and his men. The king of Westeros pointed his sword at the enemy as they approached. "For Westeros," he roared as the first wight launched itself at him. Claw came down almost as if it was acting with a life of its own, slicing the head off the creature and buffeting the limp corpse aside, as another wight took its place. Undead hands gripped his shield, but Robb continuously hacked at the damn thing before it finally went down. The shield wall wavered under the onslaught, but held as men behind the front line lent their strength to their brothers in arms. Swords, spears, axes, and maces rose and fell, without pause, as the men of Westeros desperately held themselves together, forming a rock of life against the unending sea of undead. The forces of the living took many losses. Men were dragged away from the line as several undead wights grabbed at their weapons and armor, pulling them away and swallowing them in their ranks. Robb heard their frantic, frightened cries, which became cries of pain as the man's body was torn into by teeth and splintered nails. Eventually the cries ceased, but Robb knew that he would hear them in his sleep for as long as he lived. Robb's senses became numb the longer he fought. His arms and legs were cut and torn. The front of his shield was undoubtedly scratched and scarred, but he continued to fight on, not knowing what else to do. The repetitive action of hacking and shoving became instinctual, so much so that Robb no longer thought about what he was doing or how long he was doing it for. He no longer heard the screams or cries of his men as they fought, nor felt the sting of his injuries. He didn't even seem to register the undead faces of his enemy or their glowing blue eyes. He just continued to fight. "Seven save me," Ser Balon muttered as another being entered the fray. The air in the courtyard became colder than Robb had ever felt before, shocking his system and bringing him back to reality. A freezing mist wafted through the gates, leaving frost on the pants and boots of the defenders as it wandered by. Then Robb saw it. It carried a weapon of crystal and delicate, reflective armor. Its blue skin was stretched taut over bone and sinewy muscle, with strands of snow-white hair waving in the wind. It made no sound as it moved, and crossed through the snow with unnatural ease. The most terrifying thing about the creature, however, was its eyes. They blazed like blue stars, and caused the fear in Robb's stomach to freeze. The whites moved aside for their master, as they continued to swarm over the ranks of mankind. The others did not stray from its path, as it continued to head straight towards Robb, its hateful gaze set on the king. "Your Grace," Sir Garth shouted, pulling Robb back as the other made its move, covering the distance between them in 2 swift steps, its blade poised to strike. Robb was hauled back by Balin and Roland, as the shield wall was broken and the whites washed over the defenders, seizing their chase and causing chaos as they continued forward. Robb didn't watch as his men were pushed back towards the winch. His gaze was stuck on Sargarth, as the Reachman desperately tried to hold his ground, but he was terribly outmatched. Sargarth Greystill Hightower was a good knight, but Robb knew that, besides Hobber Redwine, he was one of the weaker warriors Robb had on his king's guard. He was a man battling the inevitable. His shield was the first to go, shattered into frost-covered fragments before his sword followed suit. When Garth tried to reach for his dragonglass dagger, the other struck, nearly cutting the man from shoulder to hip before moving on as if nothing had happened. "We need to stop it," Robb grunted as he allowed himself to be hauled back to his feet. A circle of soldiers had surrounded the king, keeping the enemy at bay as Lord Tarly fought to reorganize the defenses and re-establish the shield wall. The green men had set up a defensive line in front of the winch, their archers providing support for Tarly's men. All around the castle, defenses struggled and fought valiantly to hold back the whites. Brienne and Surabar were on their respective walls, their men helping the archers keep the enemy from washing over their flanks. The rest of Robb's commanders led groups of men against the enemy, keeping them contained to the courtyard as they fought on walkways and staircases. Robb grabbed the shoulder of one of the shoulders, plunging claw into the face of the white. The man was fighting. "We need to reach the platform," he ordered, pointing towards the winch. "Form a wedge." "On me, lads," the soldier shouted as he drove forward, Robb at his shoulder. The two fought as one, forcing their way through the mass of whites. The journey wasn't easy, but each man fought as if each moment was their last. Their fury and wildness would have made any other enemy balk, but not the whites. They continued to throw themselves at the soldiers with reckless abandon. The man on Robb's right dropped as his throat was opened, but Cerebellin immediately filled the vacancy, his mace sweeping from side to side with bone-crushing blows. "Almost there," Robb grunted as he hacked away at a white. Soon, Robb's group reached Tarly's shield wall, and was swiftly enveloped by the wall before it formed again. Robb and his companions made their way up the stairs, and onto the platform. "Good to see you are not dead," Lord Tarly grumbled when Robb reached him. The Lord of Lannisport had retaken his position at the top of the stairs, watching with narrowed eyes as the defenses struggled against the enemy. A white broke through the line and rushed Tarly, but was quickly dispatched by a lightning-quick sweep from his greatsword. "I need your men," Tarly said as he planted his sword in front of him. "The stairwell must be held." "Setra Balin, Setra Roland, do as Lord Tarly says," Robb ordered. The two knights merely nodded and strode off, followed by the remaining soldiers who had helped Robb fight his way to the platform. "How bad is it?" Robb asked, when he and Tarly were alone. "We're holding, though only just," Tarly replied grimly. "They're still pouring through the gate, and the damn White Walker is taking his time getting here." "We need to take it down," Robb said. "Easier said than done," Tarly said. "More of our archers are being dragged into combat, or are dead. We're losing our support." "Is there anything we can do?" Robb asked, watching as the snow demon deflected an arrow with its sword, still keeping that slow, purposeful stride towards the platform. It was clearly waiting for an opening to appear in the defenses before it made its move. "Keep it busy long enough for one of my men to get a shot in," the green man said, joining the conversation. Like Robb and Lord Tarly, his appearance bore testament to how much he had been involved in the fighting. "We'll keep it busy," Robb swore. "Lord Tarly, it's time we end this fight." The two warriors readied themselves before making their way into the ranks of their men, pushing forward until they reached the front lines. The White Walker continued towards them, its gaze once again set on Robb. "I will keep it distracted," Robb said. "Strike as soon as you can." Like before, the whites parted as the other moved forward, leaving a perfect ring for Robb and Lord Tarly to fight the creature in. Even Robb's men moved back, giving their leaders space. Robb tossed his shield to the side and held claw with both hands as he launched himself at the White Walker. With superhuman speed, the other's sword came up to deflect Robb's strike, but unlike with Sargart's blade, Robb's did not shatter. Instead, it managed to put a notch in the ice blade. The blue eyes that had been dead set on Robb flickered for just a moment. Robb smiled grimly. "How about a fair fight?" he grunted, pushing the other back with a flurry of strikes, none of which seemed to concern his opponent. Robb had no illusions about beating the White Walker by himself. He knew enough about his abilities to know that his enemy was a superior fighter. However, he wasn't trying to end the fight, but to give Lord Tarly a chance to finish off the creature. Robb's blade flashed down at the Walker's head, but his blade was met before it ever reached its intended target, leaving Robb's chest undefended. Robb's desperate offensive had been halted, and now the Northman could only watch with growing fear as an ice dagger formed in the other's other hand, knowing that his fight and his life would be over in the next few seconds. The dagger flew forward, but suddenly stopped just before it hit Robb's armor. Heartsbane, the ancestral great sword of House Tarly, slowly emerged inch by inch from the other's chest, stopping the creature cold. With a wordless cry, the demon exploded into 1,000 tiny pieces before it was blown away by the wind. The Whites briefly looked towards where their master had fallen before resuming their attack, with a dozen launching themselves at Robb and Lord Tarly. Thankfully, several defenders pulled the two men back behind the line before they were overwhelmed. "What in the blazes is wrong?" Lord Tarly growled as he and Robb struck at any of the undead who made it past the line.
What do you mean?
Robb grunted through gritted teeth, shearing the head off of his attacker. "The mist hasn't dissipated, and none of the Whites have gone down," Tarly explained briefly. "The other is gone. What's keeping these things together?" "Perhaps their master is on the other side of the wall," Robb suggested. Tarly shook his head. "Something's wrong." The two men continued to fight for the next few minutes, their discussion forced to stop. The defenders were on their last legs, fighting with nothing but desperation and a desire to see the next day. It was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed by the unrelenting pressure from their opponents. "Robb!" Robb's father's voice rang out over the courtyard, forcing Robb to look in his direction. His father pointed towards the western wall, where another White Walker was sweeping the defenders away. Unlike its peer, its gaze was set not on Robb, but the wall. For the next few seconds, time seemed to move like molasses. Cerebar, who was clutching what was left of his left arm, was being dragged to safety by some of his men. Tormund tried to intercept the creature, but the burly warrior was thrown from the walkway and crashed through the roof of the stables in a shower of straw and snow. Thoros was the next to face the walker, flanked by Cole, his best warrior, but neither could do anything by stall the damn thing for a few seconds before they were eventually tossed aside. They were still alive, but they too had been defeated. Robb and Lord Tarly tried to cut off the being, but a new wave of Whites slammed into the defenders, keeping the two warriors at bay as the other continued forward, marching up the steps and storming through Saruman's men and scattering them like rabbits. Soon, only the green men remained between the other and the wall. It was a slaughter. Those who weren't cut down by its sword were sent flying from the force of its strikes. Its armor protected it from the spears and axes, but the true reason why the green men failed to bring down the creature was because it was simply too damn fast. The fastest warrior Robb had ever seen had been Jaime Lannister at the Battle of the Whispering Wood, but even he seemed slow compared to the other. By the time Robb and Lord Tarly reached the platform, the only one left was the green man himself, armed with only a knife. "No!" Robb shouted, rushing forward, but he was too late. The green man struck at the other, but his wrist was grabbed as soon as he moved. With unsettling calmness, the creature put its sword through Breen's chest before pushing his body away and reaching the wall. As soon as the other touched the wall, something changed. A myriad of colors flashed across the ice and glowed brightly before they all turned icy blue and disappeared. Robb didn't need to be told what just happened. Whatever magic that once protected the wall and prevented the others and their minions from crossing the tunnels was now gone. Robb was almost upon the damn thing when it turned, ripping its blade from a writhing green man as it did. The creature's swift turn and attack caught Robb off guard, and he couldn't get his blade up in time to deflect the ice blade that was flying towards his neck. However, just like before, the blade stopped before it ever reached him. The glowing blue eyes of the other widened and looked down, surprised to see the green man's dagger stabbed through his exposed ankle. The creature's destruction only took a second before it was taken away by the wind. Unlike the death of the first other, this creature's death did have an impact on the battle. Every wight in the courtyard crumpled to the ground, losing the blue light in their eyes as they did. The freezing mist that had accompanied the others had also disappeared, swept away by the same breeze that had swept away the others. In seconds, the battle was over. Robb knelt next to Brynn, holding one of his bloody hands, as the man's gaze settled on the cloudy sky above them. "We can get a maester," Robb said, his voice thick with emotion. Although the green man was exactly a close friend of Robb's, not like Smalljon or Dacey was, the man's contribution to preparing for the long night could not be understated. His knowledge of the past and their enemy had been crucial ever since Robb had sought the man out. Robb couldn't allow him to die, not after he had just saved Robb's life. Brynn's head moved from side to side in tiny, pain-filled movements. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and losing strength with every word. "This is my fate." "We can get you help," Robb pressed, but he could see that it was a futile offer. The green man slowly moved his hand so that it covered Robb's. "Good. King," the green man said, a small smile appearing for just a second, before vanishing. "I can't wait to see the sun." Without another word, the green man of the green men, the last of House Highsmith, descendant of the last hero, died in Robb's arms. Brynden Tully. The old knight released a silent sigh as he crossed under the gates and into Winterfell. Although it wasn't Riverrun, there was still a homely feel to the castle that made Brynden feel a little more at ease. That, and the fact that the castle was built on top of a natural hot spring, meaning that there was plenty of hot water. Besides the hot water, there was only one thing that Brynden was looking forward to more, and as he predicted, she was waiting for him in the courtyard. Quiet. The courtyard of Winterfell, which would usually be filled with servants and soldiers, was emptier than Brynden had expected. One man was flanking his niece and another group of servants off to the side, under the cover of the stables. They were all bundled in furs, but didn't look too miserable. Brynden dismounted and handed his horse over to one of the waiting servants, before throwing a look at Edric and the others as he made his way over to his niece. When he reached her, he knelt and bowed his head. "My lady," he said kindly. "Rise, uncle," Cat said happily, laying her soft, gentle hands on his shoulders. When Brynden was back on his feet, the two embraced warmly. "Hello, Cat," Brynden said quietly. Their hug went on for a few more minutes before Brynden pulled back and wiped the tears from Cat's cheeks. "You're still as lovely as ever." Cat slapped Brynden on his chest, but it was a weak action, and she still couldn't help but smile. "It feels like it's been forever, uncle," she said. "I've been in the south with Robb," Brynden said. "You should be proud of him. He's been a great king." "But he's not in King's Landing," Cat said, losing her smile. "No, he's not," Brynden agreed. "It's been a long, cold ride, Cat. Perhaps we can talk in the Great Hall." Cat nodded. "Of course. My steward will see that your commanders are given rooms, and that your men are taken care of. Hot food has been prepared for you in the Great Hall," Brynden smiled. "Thank you, Cat," he said, holding his arm out to her. Together, the two Tullys walked into the keep. Line break. The food was good, simple, and nourishing. A pork stew complete with potables and other winter vegetables. It was served with warm cider instead of ale, and warm, crusty bread with lots of butter. After weeks of salted pork that was as tough as leather and lumps of hardtack, the food was like a blessing from the gods. Kadet was the perfect host, sharing words with the other commanders and making sure that they had all they needed, before returning to her conversation with Brynden. She was particularly kind to Edric, which Brynden found odd considering her view on bastards, but he let the matter be. After an hour, Brynden's men took their leave and went to find their beds. After warm food and drink, on a cold day, a soft bed and thick blanket could cure any problem. Soon, all who were left in the hall were Brynden and Cat. "Cat, I hate to ask you this, but have you heard anything?" Brynden asked quietly. Cat shook her head. "It started, but that's all I know. I've seen only a few riders coming south, and they all say the same thing. The snow is worse further north." "Were these riders coming from the wall?" Brynden asked. "The last one did." "Yes," Cat answered. "He said that he had a message from the king bound for King's Landing. He was hoping that he could send a raven south from Moat to Kylan. If not there, then the twins. If the maester at Mo Kylan can get a raven in the air with this weather, then I pray for the bird, Brynden grunted, taking a sip of his cider. His best bet is probably the twins. What message did he carry for King's Landing? Kat hesitated and tightened her hold on her cup. Robb is wondering how possible it would be for him to get wildfire sent to the wall. Wildfire. Brynden sighed. That's an extreme measure. Whatever he wants it for, then he must be desperate for it. Have there been any other letters sent south? There was one where he asked for Lord Garland, Prince Oberyn and a few others by name. But they passed through here almost 2 months ago, Kat said. That boy, Gendry, saved Arya from a group of thieves. Thieves? What happened? Kat rolled her eyes and Brynden knew that it was not a topic that his niece enjoyed talking about. There were few things Kat, who liked everything to be neat and orderly, disliked more than talking about the failings of her children. Of course, since Brynden knew her so well, he knew that she only disliked her children failing because she believed that it reflected poorly on her as a mother. 3 men from the village somehow managed to sneak into the castle, disguised as guards. Arya saw through their facade immediately and stalked them. She soon found out that they planned to steal some of the food we had set aside. Kat explained, tiredly. In the early hours of the morning, Gendry found her watching the thieves. He offered to get the guard, but when she dismissed him, he went to find himself a weapon. That's when my daughter decided to confront the 3 men by herself. Brynden smiled wryly and shook her head. She's stubborn, just like her mother. And without her wisdom, Kat countered. It pains me to admit it, but Arya nearly beat all 3 men. Nearly. She was disarmed and would have been severely hurt if Gendry hadn't shown up in time. He dealt with all 3 thieves, killing 2 and knocking the 3rd unconscious. He was executed by Sarmackle weeks ago. The food was unspoiled, I assume, Brynden said. Thankfully, Kat replied. I talked with Arya. How'd she take it? Brynden asked. Kat smiled softly. After all these years, I think that I'm finally seeing eye to eye with my daughter, she said gently. I just needed to bend over myself instead of having her look up every time. Wisdom indeed, Brynden chuckled. I am glad that no one and none of the food was harmed. Gendry's a good lad, a little innocent, but he means well. Arya asked me what I thought of him, Kat said. I see Robert, but I see none of his brashness, none of his impulsivity. He's Robert without his flaws. You sound almost fond of the boy, Brynden noted. He saved my daughter's life. He seems like a good man, Kat said. Birth be damned. Brynden smiled and took another drink of his cider. I've had a lot of time to think over the past few weeks. Recently, my thoughts have turned towards Hoster. Father, Kat said, shocked. Brynden nodded. This will likely be my last war, Kat. If I manage to make it through this, then I will retake my place as Robb's master-at-arms and spend the rest of my days in King's Landing. With that in mind, I've come to wonder how my life would be different if I had just sucked my pride and married Bethany Redwine when Hoster had told me to. Kat had looked stunned, and Brynden couldn't blame her. For the vast majority of her life, Brynden had been feuding with her father. Kat's marriage, Lysa's marriage, even Hoster's death could have reconciled the 2 brothers. Now, here was Brynden, riding to fight death, admitting that he was wrong to feud with Hoster for so long. I don't know what to say, Kat admitted after a few stunned moments. You don't have to say anything, Kat, Brynden said, draining the last of his cider and getting to his feet. He laid a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry if our feud has caused you any hardship. I should have been better. Kat shook her head and grabbed his hand. You have nothing to be sorry for, Uncle. You were great. Brynden kissed his niece on her head before walking off. He needed sleep. Eddard Stark. This isn't good, Tyrion muttered from across the desk. The Lord Hand, the Queen, and the Queen of Thorns were all seated in the small council chambers, slowly making their way through the small mountain of reports that were flowing in from Westeros, none of which had absolutely anything good to say. Every day, more terrible news arrived, all because of the prolonged absence of the king and soldiers from all 7 kingdoms. What's the matter? Margaery asked, looking up from what she was reading. A young lordling had been riding around the Vale, asking for troops so that he could stamp out the homes of the mountain clansmen, since all their warriors are away in the north. Tyrion explained, Lord Belmore had him locked up for disturbing the peace, and now the lad's family is asking for our support in the matter. His father writes, and I quote, "I understand that the king hails from savages, but my son had good intentions." The Lord of Casterly Rock threw the report back on the table with a disgusted scoff. "Imbeciles. Here's one from Westeros," Margaery's grandmother said, breaking the wax seal, and briefly reading over the contents of the letter. The more she read, the deeper her frown became. "What's wrong?" Margaery asked. "Ice has begun to spread across the Mander, and there is word that fields on the northern edge of the Reach have begun to wither." Grandmother answered grimly. "Westeros believes that it will take a few months, perhaps half a year at the longest, for it to freeze over completely." "Same reports in the Riverlands," Tyrion added, holding up another letter. "The Castellan of the Twins has noticed chunks of ice floating down the river, and farmers are complaining that their crops are dying from the frost. The people of Westeros began their preparations for winter months ago, but a new threat will soon be upon us," Grandmother said, wagging her finger. "Thieves and bandits will begin to spring up like weeds in the garden. We must have a way to prune them." Tyrion chuckled suddenly, causing both women to look at him. "Do you find something amusing, Lord Tyrion?" Grandmother asked crisply.
I am reminded of something.
"That is all," Tyrion said. "After we heard of my father's defeat at High Heart, Joffrey, or his mother I should say, ordered that the city be prepared for a siege. I placed my man Bronn in charge of defending the city. Do you know what he did first?" "What's the point of guessing if you're going to tell us anyway?" Grandmother hissed. Tyrion shrugged, proving once again that he was one of the few men in Westeros impervious to Margaery's grandmother's wicked tongue. "He rounded up all known thieves and had them arrested." Tyrion said, "No trial, no evidence, nothing. He just had them thrown in the cells and was content to let them rot until the city was taken, or the siege was over. We never found any thieves in the cells when we took the city," Marga said slowly. "Where'd they go?" "I believe they became brave volunteers, and joined the ranks of the Gold Cloaks when the king attacked the city," Tyrion answered, "but my sources told me later that Aegon Targaryen gave the men two choices, fight for him or be executed, and dumped into the sea. I always thought he was a horrid young man," Grandmother grumbled. "Never understood how Rhaegar could sire such a brute." "He did spend his entire life in a mercenary camp," Margaery said. "They're certainly not the most civilized of people." "Back to your point, Lady Olenna," Tyrion said. "We cannot round up every thief in Westeros, but we can encourage small groups of soldiers to ride out into farms and villages, teach villagers how to fight and defend themselves. Perhaps they can even help organize a militia of sorts." "A farmer and his son can't fight off a band of half a dozen bandits, Lord Tyrion," Grandmother said. "They need some kind of protection. A militia is a suitable idea, but where would the arms and armor come from?" "They don't need castle-forged steel, my lady," Tyrion said. "Leather armor should serve their needs just fine, as would simple iron spears and studded cudgels. Nothing better than what the Gold Cloaks use. Can the crown afford such an expense? That would be a lot of iron to buy and disperse," Morgavy said. "Not to mention forge into weapons. If the lords could supply their villages with enough material, then we can pay them back for the material at a later date," Tyrion offered. "No need for us to do all the work. Besides, I'm sure most villages will have a blacksmith capable of forging spears and cudgels. All they need are the supplies." Margaery tapped the table thoughtfully. "We will bring this to the council, and see what they think. There's merit to your idea, Lord Tyrion, but the execution and plans afterward must be carefully examined." "Fine with me," Tyrion said with a shrug. "Now, if you two wouldn't mind, I would really like to get back to this thrilling letter from the Veiled Man's father as he lists all the reasons why his son should not be in jail." "It's all well and good to make fun of the stupid until they are at your doorstep," Margaery chuckled. "I'm sure the man means well." "He means to bore me to death, your grace," Tyrion countered. "I am short, not blind." "Or quiet," Grandmother added with a sly smile. Tyrion pointed at her from across the table. "I will have my revenge, my lady. I promise you that. I will be waiting eagerly, my lord." Grandmother shot back. "Peace, both of you," Margaery said. "Let us try and have this mess before you flirt any more." "Flirt?" Tyrion snorted before adding in a quieter tone. "She started it. Robb Stark." A massive funeral pyre had been erected outside the night fort, with dozens of bodies laying shoulder to shoulder. 3 men walked among their ranks, giving final rites. One was a green man, blessing the bodies in the name of the old gods. Another was Thoros, attending to those who followed his flaming god R'hllor. The final man was a man named Paran, a septon who traveled with the king's company. He anointed bodies with the oils of the seven. Robb watched as Brienne laid a hand on Sergarth's shoulder, said a prayer for her former brother, then stepped back for Berengar to anoint the body. The king knew how much the bonds of the Kingsguard meant to his commander. She viewed every man in her unit like her brother, and she would die to protect just as they would die to protect her. Robb had already said his goodbyes to the man, as did Ser Roland, Ser Balin, and Ser Robar once his arm had been bandaged. All three men toasted to their fallen brother, and shared the fond memories they had of him. The four men had served under Renly together before joining Robb and becoming part of his battle guard. The king waited patiently as his commander returned to his side. There was one pyre that stood apart from the rest. It was the final resting place of Bren Highsmith, the Green Man. "Rest, my friend," Robb said softly. "I promise that your name will never be forgotten." As he stepped back, he looked over at Daenerys, who stood by Drogon. It would take a lot of oil to burn so many bodies, oil that Robb would loathe to use on anything other than whites, even his own men. Thankfully, the Lady of Dragonstone was kind enough to recommend the use of her dragon to help lay the bodies to rest. It was well known that dragon fire would burn much more fiercely than oil. Daenerys nodded and whispered something to her dragon. The black dragon raised its head and unleashed a torrent of flame that consumed the entire pyre and all the bodies on it. There was not a sound from the men who had assembled to watch the funeral. The only sound was the crackling of fire from the burning pyre. "Your Grace, it is time," Brienne said, laying her hand on Robb's shoulder. "Thank you, Brienne," Robb said, glancing at his commander before walking back to his commanders. Once again, he nodded to Daenerys. Soon, the Green Man was burning alongside the others, who had fallen in the battle. Line break. "How many did we lose in the battle?" Robb asked quietly. After the funeral, a cloud of sadness as thick as any in the sky hung over the castle. Men had lost friends and brothers. Several men had been left injured and mutilated. After one battle with the enemy, men were beginning to doubt if they could handle another attack. "Roughly 100 dead, several hundred others wounded," Lord Tarly reported grimly. "As of now, we would be hard-pressed to hold off another attack like that." "There's a chance we won't have to," Jon said, crossing his arms. "The others got what they wanted. The enchantment that kept them from crossing under the wall has been dissolved." There was an underlying note of anger in Jon's voice that Robb noticed, but said nothing. During the battle, Jon and Rhaegal had been pulled over to Brienne's flank, when hundreds of whites targeted her side. They would have been overwhelmed instantly if not for his help. Unfortunately, he had missed the first other, and because he was trying to stem the tide of whites entering through the main gate, he had missed the second other as well. Robb knew that Jon blamed himself for not only the Green Man's death, but Sergarth's as well. If he had been more vigilant, then perhaps he could have destroyed the others before they had ever reached the castle. Robb had told his brother that there's no point being angry at the past. He just needed to learn from it and move on. But they lost 2 of their kind in the battle, Jaime pointed out. "They don't care," Lord Royce countered. "They got what they wanted. They know they outnumber us. What's a couple thousand whites to them? And 2 White Walkers. They still have plenty more of both. We still have 2 gates that they have not touched," Father mentioned. "There's still time for our men to heal and prepare for the next battle." "What if they come from the south again?" Jaime asked. The Green Man said that it was unlikely because they would have encroached on the Drowned God's territory. "Clearly the 2 fucking sides are working together." "We'll just have to watch both sides," Robb sighed. "We don't have a choice." "What have the other castles reported?" "None were attacked like us, my lord," Brienne said. "But all noticed that the wall changed. Many are asking what happened. Spread the word to all the commanders that the wall can no longer keep out the others or their whites. The 2nd and 3rd gates will soon fall under attack," Robb ordered. "Has there been any word from Scepter Brynden?" "Lord Garland's party has been spotted close by," Father reported. "They should arrive tomorrow." "A bit of good luck then," Lance grunted. "What of the Blackfish?" Robb asked. "He should be close to Winterfell, if not there," Lord Tarly answered. "We can only hope for him and his men to arrive in the next 3 months. With how long it took our enemy to break down the first gate, that should be enough time," Jaime said. "It may not be," Lord Royce rumbled. "In the tunnel they are safe from Lady Daenerys and Lord Jon's dragons." "Mence, do you happen to have any trappers with you?" Robb asked suddenly. The former wildling monarch shook his head. I can summon a few if you wish. What do you have in mind? Summon your best, Robb said. I want to see if there is any way we can set up traps between the third and second gate, while we have time. Mance smiled fiercely. I'll do what I can, your grace. That will be all for today, gentlemen. Lord Tarly, find out how many men we have ready for battle. Lord Royce, assess the strength of the second gate. Jaime, you're with the archers tonight. Father, make sure that anything that was damaged during the battle is repaired. The rest of you, speak with the men, see if you can lift their spirits and the damn cloud that hangs over them. Robb continued. The other men all nodded and bowed before leaving, with only Jon staying behind. Robb's brother had a worried look on his face. Robb, are you? I'm fine, Jon, Robb said, cutting off his brother. I just need some time. And Jon didn't respond. He merely clapped his brother on the shoulder before walking out. Gendry Baratheon. The wall was magnificent. There was no other word he could have used to describe the towering structure. It touched the clouds, and either way Gendry looked, it continued until it was lost in the distance. It was truly a legendary feat of engineering, ambition, and craftsmanship, unlike anything Gendry had ever seen before. The Night Fort was an impressive-looking structure in its own right, although it looked more like a castle than a fort. Gendry could easily make out the sentries on the battlements, but what confused him was why they were looking south. Surely the enemy is still north of the wall. I wonder why he's done that, Garland muttered to himself. Done what? Gendry asked. He's wondering why the king took up the defenses of the Night Fort, Oberyn grunted, glaring at the castle. Damn place is crawling with horror stories. Edric, is that true? Gendry asked, looking over at the young man. The Night King, the Rat Cook, Danny Flint, the 79 Sentinels, Mad Axe, they all originate from here. Edric answered grimly. The Night Fort was once the seat of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but it was abandoned long ago for Castle Black. There must be a reason the king has chosen to defend it, Garland said, defending his good brother. I'm sure we'll find out once we ask him. We also need to ask him why he has sentries watching the southern road. Oberyn added, and what happened to the gate? It looks like there was a battle here not long ago, Garland said, leaning forward in his saddle as he looked at the gate. Something has happened, I'm sure of that, but what I'm not sure of is exactly what happened. We would know if the others had broken through the wall, wouldn't we? Gendry asked curiously. We'd be dead, Oberyn said bluntly. You, me, your precious Stark girl, everyone north of the neck. You're as harsh as your southern son, Prince Oberyn, Garland said, the prince's foul mood finally getting to him after months on the road. The entire ride north, you've spoken of nothing but our own death and destruction. From what my brother has said about you, you've always seemed like the kind of man who enjoys a challenge. All I've known so far is a man who sounds as if he's ready to run home, back to the safety of his burning sands. Or maybe I've become as cold as this northern wasteland, Oberyn countered. Whatever the case, I speak the truth, Garland, and I know your brother would agree with me. This is our reality, as fucking horrible as it is. There is no need to speak the truth. We all know what it is, Garland argued, bringing his mount, and the entire column, to a halt, just a short distance from the castle. Do you not think every man here is aware of what's beyond the wall? Usse and that bloody wall are all that stands between death and humanity. If we fail, then not only are we dead, but everyone in Westeros, Essos, and beyond are dead, Garland shouted, rising from his saddle. I have had enough of your black mood. You are a leader of men, damn it, and I expect you to act like one. When you act as you've already given up hope, so will the men. Now, before the king sees us, are you done acting like a petulant, foul-tempered child and finally ready to be the Red Viper once again? The entire column was dead silent as Garland delivered his rant. Even Oberyn, who almost always had a witty counter or a snarky response at the ready on the tip of his tongue, looked utterly speechless. That Garland gallant, polite, kind, respectful. Garland had spoken to him in such a manner. Oberyn's legacy spoke for itself, and Edric and others had been kind enough to warn Gendry about insulting the Dornish prince. He was a man who was not only a deadly fighter and fond of poisons, but a man who was known to hold grudges for years. If there was any man who could speak to him as Garland just did, it was Garland himself. The Lord of Brightwater Keep was a warrior of renown and prestige, and had earned his respect in the War of the Five Kings several times over. Fine, Oberyn said simply. Good, Garland said after a few moments. Now let's get out of this bloody cold. The rest of the ride was finished in complete silence. The next time either Garland or Oberyn spoke was when Garland ordered the sentries to let them in. When they entered the castle, instead of the king waiting for them, there was Lord Stark, looking a bit older and much more stressed than the last time Gendry had met him in Master Mott's shop. He still wore plated leather armor, but now he also had on dark gray chainmail underneath and had a massive greatsword slung across his back. Lord Stark, Garland greeted, dismounting. When the Reachman dismounted, the rest of the company took it as their cue to do so as well. Sekros Garland, Lord Stark said, clasping arms with the man. Forgive me, Lord Garland. Now, deservingly so. Garland is just fine, my lord, Garland replied. We're family. No need for titles. Perhaps, Garland said with a smile, his positivity coming back. If you don't mind me asking, where's the king? Lord Stark shook his head. Sarobar suffered a grievous injury during the battle. The maester was forced to take the rest of his arm, just below the elbow. The king is with him now. What exactly happened? Prince Oberyn asked, joining the conversation. Prince Oberyn, Lord Stark said, a touch of apprehension in his tone. Lord Stark, Oberyn said, keeping his voice neutral. The enemy managed to find a way around the wall, Lord Stark said, answering Garland. We're still not sure about how they did, but we do know why. You were able to drive them off, from the looks of it, Prince Oberyn said. Why did they have to sneak around the wall? Gendry asked. Why did they just go under it? Gendry, isn't it? Lord Stark said. It's been a while, lad, since Talbot Mott's shop. A lot's changed too, Gendry agreed. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, you raise a good question. But let's move this conversation to the mess hall. Gel here. Lord Stark jerked his thumb towards a waiting soldier. We'll make sure your men have bunks and food. Fortunately, and unfortunately, we have a few open beds. There was a chorus of agreements as the Lord of Winterfell led Gendry and the others to another building set off to the side of the courtyard. The interior was nice and warm from the fire roaring in the back, but what caught Gendry off guard was the weirwood in the center of the room, and the group of small humanoids assembled around it. Sorry, I should have warned you that the children of the forest have sort of made the mess hall their home, Lord Stark said apologetically. If we sit off to the side and don't disturb them, we'll be fine. They lost some of their friends in the battle and are still in mourning. They're a small race, both in size and number. The four men sat around the table, with Gendry sitting next to Lord Stark and Oberyn and Garland sitting across from them. Lord Stark, what's happened here? Garland asked. We noticed the sentries and the gate. It's best if I just start from the beginning, Lord Stark said. When the war started, it was much easier than we thought it would be. The first gate held for roughly 3 months, and with the enemy so exposed, we were able to unleash hell on them from the top of the wall. Arrows, oil, and dragon fire destroyed hundreds every night. Any that tried to climb up the wall were swiftly sent tumbling to the ground. Did they only attack during the night? Oberyn asked. They did because that's when they're strongest, Lord Stark said. The king had a feeling that something was off, and he was proven right when the first gate was finally broken, but the enemy didn't flood into the tunnel. Why is that? Gendry asked. Because there was an enchantment on the wall that kept whites and white walkers from crossing under the wall, but they could still pass around it and over it, Lord Stark explained. Simple logic told us that they would try to break the enchantment somehow, and if they needed to get inside the castle to do so, then they would probably find some way around and attack us from the south. Hence the sentries and the gate, Garland said. Exactly, Lord Stark answered. They struck and struck hard. Thousands of whites and 2 white walkers attacked us. The first walker came right through the front gate, destroyed our shield wall, but was put down by the king and Lord Tarly. We were hoping that its death would stop the battle, but it turned out only to be a diversion. The second other came over one of the walls, tossed aside some of our best warriors, and was able to put a hand on the wall before it was finally destroyed by the Green Man, who killed it with his dying breath. Its touch destroyed the enchantment, then Prince Oberyn said. Now the whites and others can come through the tunnel. They can, Lord Stark nodded. They sacrificed 2 of their kind and many whites to do so, but they got what they wanted. What about the dragons? Oberyn asked. You have 2 of them. Why couldn't they stop the walkers? When the others attacked us from the south, The rest of their force was just standing out in the open north of the wall, Lord Stark replied. Robb believed that he could continue to weaken the enemy force north of the wall, while also defending the castle from the south. So Daenerys was north of the wall and Jon was helping the castle. Jon was pulled out of position both times the others entered the castle. The enemy would flood one area with whites, draw the dragon there to help, before the other would enter the fight. Did killing the two walkers help at all? Gendry asked. Immensely? Lord Stark said. Lady Daenerys reported seeing hundreds of whites go down randomly around the time the first other was killed. The destruction of the second other destroyed the whites attacking the castle. If we project those numbers along the entire length of the wall, the enemy lost thousands of whites. So we truly have to cut the head off the snake to win, Garland said grimly. Besides the battle in the castle, have there been any sightings of the others? Just once, after their slaves broke through the first gate, Lord Stark answered. Jaime Lancer saw them on the edge of the tray line, before they disappeared again. There's been no sighting since. Garland nodded. What's the king's plan now? Do as we've done for the past few months, Lord Stark said simply. We'll continue to fire on them from the top of the wall, and there are plenty of murder holes and defensive positions above the second gate, where we can drop arrows, rocks, and oil on them in the tunnel. All the while, our men can rest and recover, and we can begin thinking about the endgame. Which is what? Prince Oberyn asked. Lord Stark hesitated, something that was noticed by all three men, before finally answering. For reasons that would take too much time to explain, the others are drawn not only here, to the Night Fort, but also Robb himself, Lord Stark explained grimly. Robb has not committed to this plan, but it may be our only option. To defeat the others, we would have to use the king as bait to draw them into the castle before somehow trapping them and killing them. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, Garland said. Hopefully, Lord Stark said, looking up as a soldier slipped through the door and addressed the small group. Forgive me, my lords, but the king is free to see you now, he said quietly. Thank you, Garland said. Gendry, Prince Oberyn. Garland, do you mind if Gendry stays for a moment? Lord Stark asked. Of course, Garland said easily. Thank you for the talk, my lord. It was very helpful. Lord Stark only nodded as the two men left with the soldier, leaving Gendry alone with the Lord of Winterfell. Gendry shifted slightly, wondering what the Lord of Winterfell wanted with him. He knew that he was in trouble, but what if he had somehow found out about what happened at Winterfell? Did he know how Gendry felt about his daughter? 1,000 thoughts raced through Gendry's mind, and none were good. You look like him, you know, Lord Stark said finally. Your father. Gendry released a quiet sigh of relief and nodded. I know, I've been told that. He was a good, albeit flawed man. Lord Stark continued softly. He was headstrong, stubborn, and had a temper that raged like the storms of his homeland. He could be unpredictable at times, and gave Jon Arryn many headaches. But he was also strong, brave, and as loyal a friend as you could have. He would be the first person to defend a friend against any and all slights. He cared deeply for his friends, and those he loved, and would do everything in his power to protect them. Unfortunately, his love was like a double-edged sword. What do you mean? Gendry asked curiously. He had occasionally wondered about what kind of man Robert Baratheon was. He had heard from different men, and all seemed to agree that he was a good man, but had his problems. Now Gendry was getting to know his father from the man who was his best friend. Robert loved my sister Lyanna, Lord Stark explained. What happened to her? Well, you know the lengths Robert went to get her back. He rose in rebellion, Gendry answered. He did. Such was his love for her, Lord Stark said. When I saw my old friend again in Winterfell a few years ago, little did I know what Lyanna's death had done to him. He tried to fill the hole in his heart with food, drink, and women, but to no avail. He plunged the realm into debt, trying to find the happiness he believed Lyanna would have given him. Is that why I was born? He was just attempting to replace Lyanna Stark, Gendry asked. He wasn't angry, but a little disappointed. He knew that his father didn't care about him, or he would have acknowledged him in some way, but hearing that his mother was nothing but a distraction for a night stung. Lord Stark grimaced. As I said, your father was not a perfect man, he said, trying to lighten the blow. Do not judge him too harshly. King's Landing is a viper's nest, and Robert had probably been bitten so many times that he was numb from the poison. Gendry nodded slowly. Would he be proud of who I became? Lord Stark smiled slightly. "You certainly know how to wield a hammer, so that would have made him happy," he said before becoming a bit more serious. "I can't answer that for you, Gendry. Robert was not the same man I grew up with when I joined him in King's Landing, and I do not know you well enough to say whether he would be proud or not." Gendry looked down at the table, trying to keep the disappointment from his thoughts. He had been hoping that at least Lord Stark would have an answer to that question, but he was wrong. "Gendry," Lord Stark said, putting a gentle hand on his shoulder, "I wish I could give you a beautiful lie, but I can't. What I can say is that he'd be proud that you're here, fighting for what's right, just like I am." The older lord smiled. If he was here now, he would have poured the two of us some ale and launched into one of his war stories. How he defeated 3 armies in a single day, or how he emerged from a brothel during the Battle of the Bells, and nearly slew the hand of the king, Jon Connington. Or he would have told you his favorite story, of how he faced Rhaegar Targaryen in single combat and caved in his chest with his warhammer. "He was a great warrior, wasn't he?" Gendry said. "In his youth he was without peer," Lord Stark nodded. "He was a good man, Gendry, but I think that you will be a great man soon enough, a man Robert would be proud of." "How do you know?" Gendry asked curiously. "Who do you think raised the king?" Lord Stark replied simply, with a hint of a smile. "Robb Stark." It had been roughly 3 months since the Green Man's death, and just as they've done for the past 9 months, the others have continued to send their undead servants at the wall every night as they slowly chipped away at the second gate. Oil and rocks were quickly proven to be extremely useful when defending the second gate. The large projectiles combined with the tight confines of the tunnel had led to the deaths of thousands of wights. The section of the tunnel between the second and third gate had been filled with traps, courtesy of Mance Rayder's best hunters. Robb had inspected the new defensive measures himself, and, if he had been forced to send his own men through the tunnel, he knew that at least 70 men would have been lost or severely wounded before anyone reached the gate. Tripwires, spikes, ditches, the wildlings hunters had used every trick they had ever learned. As for those who remained outside the tunnel, there was still plenty of arrows and dragon fire for them. After the attack from the south, Robb had sent word to Cotter Pike and Denys Mallister to establish how the enemy had managed to get around the wall. It had been Pike who had found evidence of a trail of ice that would have been wide enough for 6 men to walk abreast and thick enough so that not even a giant could fall through. Pike never found where it started north of the wall, but it looked to have stopped at a section of coastline set between Eastwatch and where the wildlings had settled. That's how the others and their minions had been able to sneak by both groups undetected. With the wildlings and the defenders forced to find shelter from the weather, the enemy was able to reach the night fort without ever being discovered. As for the destruction of the ice bridge, Robb could only assume that it was the drowned god's doing. The others would never have purposefully destroyed such an asset, and Robb's men sure as hell knew nothing about it. Those who had been wounded during the battle had recovered and were ready to fight once more. They were battle-hardened and were less scared of the enemy after defeating them once. The dark cloud that had hung over them was gone, and new, invigorated soldiers had stepped up because of it. With the additions of the 40 knights that Garland had brought with him from the south, the men felt confident that they could hold off another attack from the others. There were a few who were still working on preparing for battle, one of Robb's protectors being one of them. Sarah Rubber had lost his left hand after attempting to fight the second other, and the frost from the creature's blade had spread up his forearm before a maester had even seen him. The Velaman had been forced to lose more of his arms so that the frost didn't spread any further. The maester had made his cut just below the elbow, cauterized the wound, and had watched Sarah Wubber intently for the past 2 months, while he recovered. While most men, especially a skilled warrior like Sarah Barr, would have fallen into a great depression after such a loss, the Valeman did not. Instead, he took the challenge head-on and had been training constantly so that he was better adapted to his new limitation. A spike of dragonglass had been fitted onto his shortened arm, and he trained daily with Bran as he attempted to change his fighting style to work with his longsword and spike. Garland had also been helping Sarah Barr as he was known to fight with 2 blades instead of a sword and shield. A line break. Currently, Robb watched from the top of the wall as his archers fired on the enemy. Jon and Daenerys flew around on their dragons, burning dozens of wights with every pass. Bears, wolves, spiders, giants, men, women, all were torched by the dragon's flames. Not for the first time, Robb thanked the gods that he had spared Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. A few of his counselors had believed that it was a foolish idea leaving such a powerful enemy alive, and even Margaery had spoken to him privately about his decision. She was worried that his decision would make him look weak in front of his commanders, but Robb had stood firm in his decision. Now it looked to be the best decision he ever made, besides marrying Margaery and naming Tyrion as his hand. Daenerys and her dragons had proven not to be just an advantage over the enemy, but irreplaceable pieces of the defense. 200 more archers wouldn't have been as deadly as even one of Daenerys' dragons. Night after night, the fire-breathing beasts destroyed hundreds, if not over 1,000 of whites. That kind of destruction could not have been replicated with anything man-made. Not a scorpion, not a catapult, not 500 of the finest archers in all of Westeros could have done what the dragons have done to the enemy. My lord, more whites have emerged from the tree line, Garrett Longley, the captain of Thoros' archers, said as he came up next to Robb. Has word been sent to Mance? Robb asked. The wildling leader was in charge of the defenses of the second gate for the night. It has, but I've also checked the timer. It's nearly morning, Longley said. Why would they put more pressure on the defenses if they're going to pull back soon? How does the second gate look? Robb asked. It's still holding, sire, Longley replied. It'll hold for another week, if not longer. I think they're planning something. They want to distract us, Robb said, catching on to what the archer was referring to. Keep an eye on the entrance to the tunnel, and make sure that nothing is scrambling up the wall. Yes, your grace, Longley promised, before leaving. Robb moved to the nearest viewing platform and knelt, narrowing his eyes as he watched the sea of whites. Just as Longley had said, a new wave of the creatures had emerged from the forest, but they didn't move more than 100 yards from the edge of the tree line. They just stood there, waiting. What in the blazes are they doing? Robb muttered to himself. Longley hadn't been the only one to see the wave of enemies either. With so many just standing and doing nothing, it was too tempting a target for the Lady of Dragonstone. She and Drogon dived towards them, the black dragon moving like a shadow in the night. Just as he was approaching, he opened his mouth and light emerged from his throat. Robb had seen the action 100 times before. The dozens of whites below were about to be consumed in a column of fire and destroyed like snow in sunlight. Then everything went to shit. Drogon roared in pain as his right wing went limp. The black dragon tried to move it, to stop himself from spiraling towards the earth, but every time he tried, he only managed to awkwardly almost stumble through the sky before giving a tortured cry and continuing his descent. Naturally, the beast tried to make his way back towards the wall. What worried Robb was that the blonde-haired figure on his back showed no signs of moving or trying to coax the dragon back to flight. If Daenerys had not been tied to her saddle, and effectively the dragon itself, she would have been flung off Drogon's back the minute he lost the ability to use his right wing. Daenerys' mount somehow managed to make it half the distance to the wall before he gave one final weak howl and hit the ground, sending a cloud of snow into the air from where he had collapsed, crushing dozens of whites when he landed. The sudden turn of events was so dramatic that many of the archers had stopped firing to look in the dragon's direction. Robb couldn't believe what he saw either. His best weapon against the enemy, the irreplaceable part of his defense, was now laying on the ground with whites closing in around it. It took an immense amount of willpower for Robb to draw his gaze from the downed dragon and back to his archers. Fire! Fire, you fools! He roared, rising to his feet. Give those bastards everything you have. Keep them away from that dragon. The archers, galvanized by Robb's words, resumed their task, focusing their arrows on the enemies around Drogon's body. But they couldn't keep the enemy totally away. Whites were beginning to crawl onto the black dragon, and although Drogon tried to tear them off with his hind legs and burn any that got close to his head, Robb knew it wouldn't be long before the dragon was overwhelmed. Dracarys! Robb heard Jon bellow faintly as he and Rhaegal came to Drogon's aid. The green and bronze dragon created a ring of flames around his clutch mate as Jon slid down from his saddle, drawing his sword as he did. Jon! Robb shouted, but he knew that his brother couldn't hear him, and all he could do was watch as Jon charged into the enemy as they closed around Daenerys. Robb could barely breathe. His brother was down there, surrounded by the enemy, and there was nothing he could do to help. All he could do was watch as Jon cut his way through the whites around Daenerys. He fought like a man possessed, cleaving the undead minions in two as he continued forward, not seeming to care as arrows flew all around him. When he finally reached the girl, He cut the ties keeping her on the saddle and threw her over his shoulder. As he was running back towards Rhaegal, a wight broke through the flames and charged him from behind. "Jon!" Robb shouted worriedly. But he had not been the only one to see the wight. Just before it reached Jon, an arrow slammed into its skull and brought it down. The Northman looked over at where the arrow had been fired from and saw Ygritte, the fiery-haired wildling archer, grab another arrow and fire it. Her eyes set firmly on Jon as she picked out another target. Robb's brother reached Rhaegal and laid Daenerys over his neck before hauling himself back onto the saddle. With a few strong strokes of his wings, the green and bronze dragon lifted himself back into the air before reaching out and grabbing hold of Drogon by his hind legs and neck, lifting him as well. The few wights who had been clinging to the black dragon fell off as Rhaegal brought his brother back to safety. The king watched as Rhaegal brought Drogon up and over the wall, clearly straining to do so, before slowly coming down outside the walls of the night fort where their pen was. "Longley, you have the command," Robb called to the bowman, as he moved quickly towards the winch. "Send word to my father if anything happens." "Aye, your grace," the Stormlander called back, grabbing another arrow from his rapidly depleting quiver. As soon as Robb shut the door to the lift, it began to move. It didn't take very long for him to reach the courtyard, but every second felt like an eternity. His eyes never left the warehouse where the dragon slept. He struggled to keep his breathing under control and to slow down his beating heart. He had been through adversity before, but there was a reason this was hitting the young monarch so much. The dragons had been his biggest advantage, and he might have just lost one as well as the rider. As soon as Robb hit the ground, he slammed open the door and was striding, nearly running towards the main gate. "I need 2 maesters now," he bellowed to no one in particular. "Your grace?" one of the soldiers asked, clearly confused. "What's happened?" "2 maesters," Robb snapped. "Now." The soldier simply nodded and ran off. Robb made it through the main gate before catching sight of Jon and running towards him. His brother was patting the shoulder of another man in the snow, but Robb wasn't focused on him, only Jon. "Jon!" Robb called as he approached. The 2 brothers embraced fiercely, hugging as if they were seeing each other for the first time in years. "I'm fine," Jon said, finally pulling back before moving aside. Ser Jorah was kneeling in the snow, holding the lifeless body of Daenerys Targaryen in his arms as he wept. The dark red mark stain on the side of her torso, and the cut in her furs, were obvious to see. Her silver blonde hair was wet with snow, and her flawless skin was paler than normal. Her violet eyes were wide open and pointed towards the sky, thankfully devoid of the pain she felt in her last moments. "What happened?" Robb asked, turning back towards Jon. "I saw Drogon's wing, but—" "Your grace," a man said as 2 maesters approached. "We got here as soon as we could. I need one of you to look after Lady Daenerys," Robb ordered, gesturing to Ser Jorah, "the other with me and Jon." As one of the maesters knelt next to the Northern Knight, Robb and the other followed Jon to where Drogon was resting in the snow, his head curled under his good wing, whimpering in pain. Sarabersan stood on the other side, simply staring at the wound that had brought the beast down. "Drogon was hit by a spear," Jon explained, and now Robb saw what had happened. Crippled him in moments. A spear, with a head made from the same ice-like material as a White Walker's sword, had cut through part of the joint that holds the dragon's wing to the rest of his body, before hitting Daenerys. The blade was stained with both black and red blood, some from Drogon and some from Daenerys. "She was dead before Drogon ever hit the ground," Ser Barristan said, quiet tears sliding down his cheeks and into his white beard. Robb wasn't surprised that Ser Barristan and Ser Jorah had been the first to arrive when Rhaegal brought Drogon and Daenerys back over the wall. He knew that one of the 2 always stayed up, watching as Daenerys flew over the wall into battle and when she returned. Both men were extremely loyal to the girl, and the tears on their faces were proof of that. "Neither saw it coming, Robb," Jon continued. "It flew from the trees. It was thrown by a White Walker," Robb sighed, running a hand through his curls. "They created a target for her and lured her in. It was a trap from the beginning and she fell for it. Damn bastards knew that the dragons were our greatest weapon, and now they've managed to injure one and kill Daenerys in the process. Your grace, I will return, but I will need much more help to get the spear out, as well as a heavy sedative," the maester explained apologetically, not wanting to interrupt Robb. "I believe that the dragon may be fine, but he will be grounded for a while. Go, do what you must, Robb said with a slight wave of his hand. Ser Barristan wasn't far behind him as he gave Robb a nod before returning to Ser Jorah and Daenerys. This is a setback, but one we can work with, Jon said quietly. We still have Rhaegal and me. Yes, but what if you were to go down too? Robb countered. Besides, if Daenerys didn't feel confident controlling both dragons, what do you think you'd be able to do? Jon, you've been flying Rhaegal for less than a year. Daenerys had raised them since they were eggs. There might be a way, but I need to talk to Bran first, Jon said thoughtfully. But for right now, Rhaegal and I will continue to do what we've done, and won't stray far from the wall. Robb crossed his arms and looked north. A million thoughts ran through his head, but he ignored them all. When the long night began, he believed that he and his men could weather it like a storm, reducing the enemy until only the White Walkers remained. Now Robb knew that he would be putting more people at risk if he did that. He needed to figure out a way to end the war, and soon. There had always been a thought lingering in the back of his mind. It's been there since the others first attacked the wall. It was a risk, and one that would put a lot of people in danger, himself included. But if it worked, then it would not only end the war, but the threat of the White Walkers altogether. My lords, a soldier said, rushing up to Robb and Jon. Yes, Jon asked, after Robb didn't answer immediately. Lord Stark has assembled the King's War Council and is waiting for both of you to attend, the soldier replied with a slight bow. He also says to take your time. Tell him that we will be there soon, Jon said. Also ask Ser Barristan if he and Ser Jorah would like any help building a pyre. The soldier bowed again and left. What are you thinking about? Jon asked as the two brothers made their way back towards the castle. It's nothing, Robb said, shaking his head. Just a thought, nothing more. Most of your thoughts turn into actions, Jon countered. Tell me what's on your mind. It's a way to end the war, but it's risky, Robb said finally, relenting. It can only be used as our last option. Jon nodded slowly. If you're thinking about what I think, then you're right. If that plan fails, then humanity is doomed. Robb could only nod. It didn't take a genius for someone to look at his plan and know what will happen if it fails. There was no backup plan. If it worked, then the war was over. If it didn't, then Robb will be dead, and he won't have to think about all who he let down. Keep it to yourself, Jon, Robb grunted, wanting to change the subject. After the meeting, you might want to thank the red-haired wildling girl. She saved your life. Jon glanced at his brother. Ygritte? She put an arrow between a White's eyes when it was about to get you from behind. Robb said as they climbed the steps to the room. She deserves some sort of recognition for saving your lordly face. Jon chuckled as the brothers entered the room. As the soldier said, their father had assembled Robb's commanders. Some of the men looked as if they had just woken up, but they all looked alert and ready for anything Robb had to say. I've filled them in on what happened during the battle, Father said as Robb and Jon took their places around the table. How is Lady Daenerys? Prince Oberyn asked. Dead, Robb answered grimly, giving an apologetic look to the Dornishman. Her dragon took a spear to his wing and it hit Daenerys as well. She died not long after it hit her. She will be missed, Garland said. I know that I have not been here as long as the others, but it was evident that she and her dragon were vital to our defenses. A few others around the table echoed Garland's sentiments. Daenerys had become well-liked by both soldier and commander during her time at the Wall. She was kind, respectful, and attentive when they spoke to her. She never tried to place herself above them. Robb's commanders enjoyed that she didn't try to pry her way into the war meetings. She merely did her duty night after night and never asked for any social praise or recognition. To put it shortly, her image in the eyes of those who had fought against her at Harrenhal had improved significantly. And the dragon? Lord Tarly asked. Grounded for now, Jon replied. The maester who saw his wing believes that he can be healed, but it will take time. Fortunately, we have another dragon rider, Prince Oberyn commented, looking at Jon. I've always wondered why you've been able to ride Rhaegal. A conversation for another time, Prince Oberyn, Robb said, immediately stepping in before the Dornishman could change the subject. Right now, we must focus on the loss of Lady Daenerys, and what we need to be doing now that we are down to one dragon. Oberyn sniffed and sent a look at Robb before crossing his arms and nodding. Robb took it as the prince backing down. Mats, how did the second gate look? Robb asked. It'll hold for a few more days, hopefully. More, Mance said with a shrug. My trappers are going through the last portion of the tunnel now, making sure that everything is in order. Father, how are the defenses coming for when the last gate falls? Robb said, turning to the older man. Nearly complete, Father promised. Currently, the lead builder and I are trying to work out a way to dig a ditch without compromising the integrity of the castle or the wall. You'll fill the ditch with oil? Lord Tarly asked. Of course, Father said easily. Good, Lord Tarly grunted, content that Robb's father hadn't missed anything. Your Grace, were you or Lord John able to get a look at who threw the spear? Lord Royce asked curiously. Surely this is a desperate move by our enemy, if they mean to cripple our greatest weapons. They must be running out of their minions. Or they're preparing for the end of the war, same as us, Prince Oberyn countered. If I was told correctly, the enemy pulled John away from where the White Walkers entered the castle. They could be taking out the dragons before the final gate breaks, and they finally enter the tunnel. Did the spear come from the trees or open land? Jaime asked, addressing the question to Jon. It came from inside the tray line, Jon answered. If the others had shown themselves, they must have known that Daenerys would have gone for them instead of the Whites. She would have been able to avoid the spear if she had seen it coming towards her. They hit her like the King's archers hit the White Dragon during the Battle of King's Landing, Lord Tarly noted. When the beast wasn't looking. You make a good point, Jon, Robb said. Daenerys and Drogon would have been harder to bring down if they had seen the spear coming. The king turned towards Prince Oberyn. Your point is valid as well, Prince Oberyn. The enemy has to be preparing for the end, and they know that they have a better chance of winning if the dragons are grounded. All that we can do now is prepare as best we can for the end and come up with a way we can win this war once and for all. Do you happen to have an idea about how to do that, Your Grace? Garland asked. Robb looked at Jon, their father, and Lord Tarly, meeting their eyes for just a second before finally shaking his head. As of now, I do not, Robb answered finally. All I know for sure is that the end of this war will be bloody and dangerous for us all. They have taken several months to break down our gates, and with each passing night, we continue to whittle down their forces with arrows, oil and stone. However, it'll all be just a preamble for when they finally break through the tunnel and we have to fight them in the courtyard, on the steps and walkways, and in every room. That will be the war. That battle will determine everything we have worked to accomplish, everything worked to prepare for, every sacrifice we have made. It will determine the fate of Westeros, Robb said finally. Jon Stark. Daenerys' funeral had been a small, quiet affair close to the edge of the forest, away from the prying eyes of the sentries, with only a few people in attendance. Her pyre had been put together by Ser Jorah alone, as the Northern Knight was too lost in his own grief to accept anyone else's help, including Ser Barristan's. It had taken him an entire day to do it, but Ser Jorah had been adamant about doing it himself. Neither Jorn nor Ser Barristan desired to fight with the man as he mourned. Even hours after her death, the Northern Knight's eyes were rimmed with red from his tears. Jon knew that the Northman was devoted to his mistress, but it had been Ser Barristan who had explained that Ser Jorah had always felt a love for Daenerys that went beyond protector and mistress. Daenerys had never reciprocated his feelings, and Ser Jorah's never died. Ser Barristan, do you have any final words for her? Jon asked quietly, as the three men stood a little distance from the pyre. Robb, father, and Prince Oberyn stood a little further behind them, present, but allowing the three men to grieve together. She had much more to give, the old knight replied sadly. It's a terrible loss that such a good soul has been lost. Aye, it is, Jon agreed. Ser Jorah, the former lord of Bear Island, shook his head. I've already said what I've wanted to say. It's time for her to be put to rest. Do you have anything you'd wish to say, Jon? Ser Barristan asked. Jon folded his hands in front of him and gazed at the corpse of his cousin. Despite his initial feelings for the girl and House Targaryen as a whole, Jon found himself admiring the person she had been. She had been brave and courageous in the face of danger, kind and caring when speaking with anyone who crossed her path, and showed great fortitude and wisdom when dealing with adversity. She may not have been the perfect person, showing signs of stubbornness, naivety, and brashness, but her intentions had always been true. Jon still viewed himself as a Stark. He always would. But Daenerys had shown him that being a Targaryen did not mean that you were mad or intent on conquering. She showed him that being a Targaryen came with its own kind of honor and prestige as descendants of Valyria. She did what Robb believed that she could, Jon said finally. She helped ease the stain that her father and others had left on the realm. All that anyone can hope to do is follow her example, help those who need it, show kindness and generosity whenever possible, and try to leave this world a better place than before. Well said, Ser Barristan said with approval. Jon looked at Rhaegal. The green and bronze dragon had spent the majority of the time comforting his brother, as Drogon dealt with his wound. The two had been inseparable. It had taken all of Jon's efforts to bring the dragon to the funeral, so that he could light the pyre. Dracarys, Jon ordered. Rhaegal whimpered, but did as Jon said. Soon, the stack of wood and the Lady of Dragonstone was consumed in dragon fire. Neither Jon, nor Ser Barristan or Ser Jorah could look away from the fire, despite the uncomfortable heat that came from it. This would be their final view of the woman. Each of them admired, and in Ser Jorah's case, loved. Will she be the last? Ser Jorah asked quietly after nearly half an hour. He looked at Jon. Will she be the last Targaryen? Jon looked away from the fire and at the northern night. There was a note of challenge in the man's voice that Jon certainly noticed. Ser Jorah didn't want the house of the woman he loved to be gone. He probably believed that if House Targaryen could go on, then so could Daenerys' legacy. Jon hated shattering that belief. Yes, she was, Jon said quietly. I mean to stay as Jon Stark, legitimized son of Eddard Stark. Then Daenerys died for nothing, and you disrespect her even now, Ser Jorah spat. She welcomed you as family, damn it. Hoah, Ser Jorah, we cannot tell Jon who he should or should not be. Ser Jorah Barristan said, trying to calm his fellow knight, but to no avail. He will let a great and noble house crumble to dust, just because he was raised in the north, Ser Jorah growled. Rhaegar Targaryen was your father, boy. You are Jon Targaryen. Are you saying that to honor Daenerys or to replace her? Jon asked evenly, stopping Ser Jorah's rant in its tracks. The Northern Knight glared at Jon for a second, too furious to speak, before taking one final look at the burning embers of the pyre and storming off. I am sorry, Jon, Ser Barristan sighed. Ser Jorah truly did love the girl. I know, Jon said as Robb and Prince Oberyn approached. I do not blame him for his anger. He is confused and grieving. I take nothing that he says to heart. Thank you, Ser Barristan said. I will try to calm him down. I know it hasn't been said yet, but thank you for saving her. She deserved a proper farewell. Of course, Jon said easily. The old knight looked at Jon for a second, as if contemplating something, before turning towards Robb and Prince Oberyn, bowing to them and trudging back towards the castle. Rhaegal was the next to leave, gliding back to where his brother was huddled in their shelter. The spear had been taken from his side and the team of maesters had attempted to bandage the wound to the best of their abilities. What was Ser Jorah angry about? Robb asked curiously. They were the words of a man who did not know what he was speaking about, Jon said simply, waving aside Robb's question. Prince Oberyn, I know that Daenerys is related to you through her brother. I am sorry if her loss has caused you any sorrow. The Dornishman looked at the embers before shaking his head. Truth be told, White Wolf, I did not know her as well as perhaps my brother did. From what I understood, she was a good person, and for that reason alone she will be missed, he said. However, the king has told me that you are related to Daenerys just as much as I was, if not more so. Jon looked at Robb, who merely shook his head. Prince Oberyn had figured it out by the time he confronted me. There was no point lying. Jon nodded slowly, and looked at Prince Oberyn. Then you must hate me. I should, Prince Oberyn agreed, but I haven't made up my mind yet. Jon shared a look with his brother, who merely shook his head, telling Jon to wait for the prince's explanation. For a long time, I was under the delusion that Lyanna Stark somehow seduced Rhaegar away from my sweet sister, Oberyn explained. I was angry at both Rhaegar for staining Ilya's honor, and with Lyanna for going off with a married man. However, my anger had met its match when the king told me of the actions taken by Rhaegar against the Stark girl. The Dornishman shook his head in disgust. I am disappointed that Lyanna Stark was so easily persuaded by the Bard Prince, but rape is inexcusable in the eyes of the Dornish. I remember seeing Lyanna Stark at Harrenhal. She was pretty for a northerner, but I still believed her to be a child. We do not condone hurting children in Dorne. Our father didn't condone the murders of Elia or her children, Jon said. He felt, like you, that Tywin in the mountain needed to be punished. You do not need to justify the actions of Ned Stark, Prince Oberyn said with a wave of his hand. Unlike Aegon, I knew that the North had a just reason for going to war against the Mad King. The death of family must always be avenged, no matter what. Ned Stark's reactions to the murders were also well known in Sunspear, and we respected that he was man enough to speak out against them, unlike his bullish friend. The Mad King did call for Robert's head as well, Robb grunted. Robert had some reason to fight. Lyanna was also his betrothed. Reborn looked at the king. The Stat King called my niece and nephew dragon spawn and allowed murderers to walk free. I also believe that if a man cannot keep his betrothed from running off with another man, what does that say about him? Robb nodded slightly. Fair point. Now to you, Jon, Prince Oberyn said, turning back to him. Are you a Stark or are you a Targaryen? Does it matter? Jon asked curiously, although he had already made up his mind. To me, no, Oberyn said with a shrug. I have no fear of you taking the Iron Throne. You clearly love your brother and family. Only a fool would believe that you want the throne and intend on rebuilding the Targaryen dynasty. Unfortunately, there are many fools in the world. All I have ever wanted to do is serve my brother and help my family, Jon said. I know who my parents are, and I'm sure after the long night, many others will know as well. But I consider my parents to be the ones who raised me, fed me, and sheltered me, who protected me. Then you are Jon Stark, Oberyn said. Legitimized son of Eddard Stark, Lord Paramount and Warden of the North, Jon replied. You may also be the prince that was promised, if the legends are true, Robb said with a slight grin. Jon rolled his eyes and gave his brother an annoyed look. Rhaegar misinterpreted the prophecy. Perhaps not, Oberyn mused. I read that when I was at the Citadel, and my uncle also wrote to me about it, heralded by a bleeding star born amidst salt and smoke, and he would have a song of ice and fire. A savior that would save the world from a great darkness, Robb added before pointing towards the wall. If the enemy on the other side of that wall isn't great, I'm not sure what is. Ned Stark did manage to defeat Arthur Dayne when he went after his sister, Oberyn said thoughtfully. A bleeding star, perhaps. Ice and fire. Stark and Targaryen, Robb said. A fine argument, but I was not born amid salt or smoke, Jon pointed out defensively. And if nothing else, you, Robb, are saving the realm from the great darkness. You rallied the 7 kingdoms to defend the wall. I've done nothing but play my part, as are many others. Perhaps not literal smoke or salt, Jon Stark, but do not forget what was happening when you were born. Prince Oberyn countered. The realm was in tatters. Villages were nothing but smoking ruins, and tears were cried by all the mothers, sisters, daughters, and wives who lost their menfolk in the war. There you see, Robb said. Jon frowned. It's a coincidence. Robb shook his head. I told you that you were destined for greatness, Jon, but if you're too stubborn to see it, then I have nothing to say. Your birth aligns with a great prophecy. You ride a bloody dragon, and you still stand there in defiance. Yes, Jon said simply. I give up, Robb sighed. Oberyn had been watching the conversation between brothers, with some amusement before he glanced towards the castle. We have company, he said, changing the topic. Jon looked over at the night fort. A small army was approaching the fortress, and while the men were bundled from head to toe in furs, the banners they carried were unmistakable. The majority of the men were on foot, carrying banners of a prancing black stag on a field of gold. The group of horsemen leading the army carried a banner that made Jon grin. It was a leaping black trout. It's the Blackfish, Jon said. It seems help has finally come. And none too soon, Robb said, his tone unmistakably grim. Come, let's go see our new guests, and welcome them to our frozen hell and the demons that lay beyond.
Christian Brendan.
Tully. Brendan knew that he was not walking into a particularly happy environment. These men were fighting the living dead, and legends were just on the other side of the giant wall of ice. Combined with the cold weather and the near-constant darkness, it was enough to keep any man in a foul mood. But the mood around the night fort made it seem like the war was over, and the men were just waiting to die. Shara Brendan, Ned said, walking up to the aging knight. Ned, Brendan greeted, dismounting and clasping arms with the Lord of Winterfell before the two friends embraced. Even though they had seen each other almost 2 years ago at the Battle of King's Landing, there had still been plenty of years where they had not seen each other or exchanged letters. Ned had been busy raising his family and ruling the north, while Ser Brynden had been active as the Knight of the Gate, protecting the Vale and clashing with the mountain tribes. "Your men are welcome," Ned said kindly. "You have brought the men of the Stormlands. There's no tougher bunch." "I thought you'd want the best," Ser Brynden said, with a grim smile. "Is the king in a meeting? Forgive me, but I was expecting him to greet me." "Normally he would," Ned nodded. "However, he and Jon are currently occupied with something. Come, I'll tell you over a tankard." The two men made their way off to one side of the castle, where Ned ushered the old knight into a single room that held a few chairs, a desk, and some other wooden furniture. A large round table was set on the other side of the room, and a large map of the wall was pinned to the table with daggers. As Ser Brynden took a seat, Ned grabbed them both tankards of ale before sitting across from him. "This is Robb's office, as well as the meeting chambers for his commanders," Ned explained.
How has the war been going?
Ser Brynden asked. "Your wife tells me that he sent for wildfire." Ned nodded. "Yes, but it is fruitless now. The war started off rather well. It took 3 months for the Whites to finally break through the first gate. They charged the wall every night for 3 months, and for 3 months, hundreds of the buggers were destroyed, and we never lost a single man." "When did the shit happen?" Brynden asked, knowing full well that no one ever goes through a war without losing a single soldier. "After they breached the first gate, we found out that the magic that had helped build the wall kept the buggers and their minions from crossing it," Ned explained, cradling his tankard in his hands. "Of course, we knew that they wanted to break the enchantment. So they came from the south," Brynden said. "It was only logical." "Aye, they did. And the men here got their first taste of battling Whites," Ned said grimly. "We won, but it came at a cost. The Whites came in constant waves, and were much deadlier than even the wildest animal. I wouldn't doubt that many of the men who survived still have nightmares about that day." "I assume that a White Walker was leading this southern force," Brynden said, taking a drink. 2. Lord Tarly and Robb killed the first one, while the second was killed by the Green Man. But only after it had broken the magic that protected the wall, Ned answered. "Sarah Garth of the Kingsguard was lost, as was the Green Man, and Sarah Robbar and hundreds of others were wounded. We were reeling, and that night, the enemy came again in full force, free to enter the tunnel and continue their siege of the wall." "How many Whites have you destroyed so far?" Brynden asked curiously. "Hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps," Ned answered. "But the others not only have more than enough of their servants to throw at us, but they have no care about how many they lose. They will unleash their hordes on us, and no matter how many die to arrows, oil, and dragonfire, they continue. It's enough to make any man doubt his courage." "Dragonfire," Brynden nodded. "How has that experiment worked out?" "It was excellent," Ned sighed. "The dragons killed hundreds a night, usually destroying the worst of the enemy, such as giants and spiders and others. That was until Daenerys Targaryen was killed, and that black dragon of hers was injured." "Killed?" Brynden said, leaning forward. "When?" "Just last night," Ned said sadly. "Jon and his dragon Rhaegal managed to pull the girl and her dragon from the battlefield, but it was too late. The black dragon is grounded for some time, and you passed the small funeral that was held for the girl." Brynden nodded slowly. "How bad are things, Ned?" "Could be worse," Ned shrugged. "The second gate is still holding, but it will only last for another week or so. The ground in front of our third and final gate is littered with traps, but it won't do much but save us a couple of arrows. We still have Jon and his dragon, thankfully, but one dragon is not the same as two." "Does Robb have a plan?" Brynden asked. "He's working on one," Ned said vaguely. "While he does that, the castle is preparing for the final battle. The enemy will take another 3 months to get through this last gate, I assume," Brynden said. "That's the hope," Ned replied. "Once that last gate is down, that's it. We'll have no way to plug the gap, and there's no other place in Westeros where we can hold them back." "We can't fall back, Brynden. The wall is our best and only hope." Brynden looked at Ned for a long moment before tipping his head back and finishing his drink in a single action. When he finished, he rose to his feet and moved towards the pitcher of ale. "We're gonna need more ale," he grunted. "Tyrion Lannister." Tyrion sat with Lady Olenna, the two of them listening to the cries and screams of the queen as she gave birth to her second child. Occasionally, one of Archmaester Amos's helpers would exit the room, give a brief update to the odd pair, and immediately return to her post in the room. Other times, one of the women would leave the room, be gone for a few minutes, before returning with a servant laden with sheets, water, or whatever else the Archmaester needed. Tyrion was having trouble controlling his reactions due to the noises coming from the room. While he struggled not to flinch every time he heard his queen scream, the old woman beside him calmly continued with her needlework, slowly creating a beautiful wolf whose neck was entwined with the stem of a golden rose. The queen was accompanied by Archmaester Amos, Grand Maester Sam, and a small army of midwives, each with years of experience, helping women through the trials and pain of childbirth. Although this was not Margaery's first time going through childbirth, neither Tyrion nor the Queen of Thorns believed that the Archmaester had been overly cautious. The prince was currently in the care of Mara Forrester and Greywind in the Godswood, while Margaery was locked away. Tyrion feared that having an anxious direwolf that was bigger than him would cause many problems if he felt like Margaery was in danger. Besides, the Archmaester had made it clear that he did not want the giant wolf anywhere near the birthing room. Not out of any fear of the creature, but because he did not want to keep shooing away a wolf that could devour his leg with a single snap of his mighty jaws. "How can you stand that sound?" Tyrion groaned, burying his head in his hands as he heard the queen cry out for what seemed like the 100th time. The birth had been going on for what seemed like ages, but the Queen of Thorns had been quick to remind him that, in terms of births, Margaery's was going quite quickly. Women deal with just as much screaming and blood as men. The only difference is that we see it in the bedroom and not on a battlefield with a sword in our hands. Olenna replied calmly, "You men seem to think that anything over half an hour is an eternity, especially in the bedroom. No patience whatsoever." Tyrion rolled his eyes. "I hate to poke holes in your statement, my lady, but the first is that I am not like most men. The last time I was on the battlefield, I was knocked unconscious before I ever made it to the field, and, for your information, I enjoy taking my time in the bedroom, though that is a conversation best reserved for me and me," Tyrion said, holding up one finger before raising another. "Second, I do have patience, but screaming has certainly shortened that fuse. Why don't you read one of those dusty books you always seem to have on hand?" Olenna offered, not looking up from her work. "I was told that you were a ravenous reader." "I prefer a good Dornish vintage and some quiet when I read, my lady," Tyrion argued. "As you can see, I have neither a book, nor wine, nor any bloody silence." "No, but you have quite a few complaints," Olenna pointed out sarcastically. "Birthing a child is no quick process or a quiet one by any means, my Lord Hand. It's messy, bloody, and very, very loud. Men will never know the pain that women go through. It's excruciating. Screaming is one of our ways of dealing with it. I gave birth to 3 children, and I screamed while pushing out each and every one." "Surely there's some way where," Tyrion said, miming covering his mouth. His question was obvious. Olenna scoffed. "You truly know nothing about childbirth, do you?" "Considering that I have never had a wife, and my desire to be far away from my sister whenever she was pregnant, no, I know nothing," Tyrion grumbled. "A woman must be awake during the event," Olenna said, continuing to lecture Tyrion while she worked. "She must help push the baby out just as the midwives are helping guide it. She is an active participant in the birth. She can't just fall asleep and expect the baby to be pulled out of her." "Apparently not," Tyrion muttered, slumping in his seat. "My lord," a servant said quietly, approaching Tyrion and holding out a message to him. "Word from the wall. The raven flew from Harrenhal." "Thank you," Tyrion said, taking the parchment and opening it. "What does our king report?" Olenna asked, placing her needlework to the side. "They are currently holding the enemy at bay, and they have not yet breached the tunnel that goes under the wall," Tyrion noted, making sure to read each line with extreme care. "A sea of whites that go on for as far as the eye can see. Arrows, oil, and dragon fire have all worked to desired effect." Tyrion's voice trailed off as he read the final paragraph. "Sip," Olenna pressed. "What else?" "The king is requesting pots of wildfire," Tyrion said gently, "and with great horror, he states that it will be needed, either at the wall or to protect the city of King's Landing, should the king and his men fail to protect the realm." He handed the message to the woman. "He has asked that whoever delivers the substance be given strict instructions to be ready to stop and destroy it, or use it at a moment's notice." Things are dire then, Olenna sighed sadly. Perhaps I have become too optimistic, but I was rather hoping that Robb Stark could produce one more miracle in my lifetime. If he's asking for the vile potion, then he is truly desperate. Desperate times call for desperate measures, Tyrion nodded. Have you looked at the date of the letter? Olenna checked and immediately shook her head. He sent this months ago. The rider would have had dozens of opportunities to send a raven, but the weather must have stopped him, Tyrion assumed. Winterfell moat Colin, and the twins are the first that come to mind. If the messenger had to ride as far south as Harrenhal to finally get this message attached to a raven, it could take several months to get barrels of wildfire. That's without factoring in the time it would take to make the stuff. So what do you plan to do, Lord Hand? Olenna asked, folding the letter and setting it atop of her needlework. I will do as the king commands, Tyrion said, after a few moments of thinking. But I will also ensure that the city and other strongholds along the King's Road are prepared for an army of whites. Winterfell, the twins, and Harrenhal, I assume, Lady Olenna said. The first batch will be sent to the wall, with instructions to stop at the castles you mentioned, if forced to, and the second batch will be for King's Landing. Tyrion explained, I feel like that is the safest method to distribute the wildfire. You hear no argument from me, Lord Tyrion, Olenna said. The two became silent as they realized that something was different. Something had changed in the time that the messenger had dropped off the letter, and during their discussion. Then the cries of a babe broke their confusion. It seems we have a new prince or princess, Lady Olenna said contently, grabbing her cane and rising to her feet. We will keep the king's letter a quiet matter for now. My granddaughter has been through an ordeal, and this would weaken her already fragile physique. Tyrion grabbed the letter and tucked it into the back of his belt. It's a letter from Tommen is all. That it is, Olenna said as Samwell opened the door, looking red-faced and tired, but extremely pleased. My lady, my lord, would you like to come and meet the queen's daughter? Samwell asked, waiting to give the gender of the child for dramatic effect. Well, we're not waiting for the sheep to turn into lions, Olenna said, emphasizing her statement with a firm tap of her cane on the stone floor. Samwell, too happy to take notice of the old lady's comment, opened the door and allowed Tyrion and Olenna inside. A low fire burned cheerfully in the fireplace, giving the room a warm, but not uncomfortably so, atmosphere. A group of midwives bustled around the queen, checking her pillows, sheets, blankets, and ensuring that she had plenty of water. Archmaester Amos was leaning over the queen, who was pale and slick with sweat, checking her and the little bundle in her arms. Your Grace, your grandmother, and Lord Tyrion are here, Sam said gently. My dear, Olenna said, her voice full of compassion and love as she moved to her granddaughter's side. She is very tired, Lady Olenna, Archmaester Amos said, straightening. However, she and the princess are healthy. Grandmother, the queen said, her voice very quiet as she reached out her free hand to her grandmother. I'm here, Olenna said, taking the queen's hand. You did wonderfully, child. I have a daughter, Margaery said, a tired smile spreading across her face as her voice cracked. I have a daughter. She's beautiful, Olenna said, briefly letting go of her protégé so that she could brush her wizened hand over the babe's head. For just a second, she revealed dark hair, and when the child opened her eyes she had dark gray eyes that looked like polished orbs of granite. She takes after her grandfather, Margaery chuckled, looking at the child with unparalleled love. The Warden of the North. Then she will be beautiful and fierce, Olenna said confidently. What will her name be? Margaery gently brushed her thumb over the babe's nose, making the child, who was being remarkably quiet, squirm at her touch. The queen thought for a few moments before finally responding. Tira, she said, her name will be Sarah Stark. A good strong name, Olenna said approvingly. My lady, I believe it would be wise to give the queen and Princess Sarah some time to rest and recover. Archmaester said kindly, but with some authority in his voice. You should return sometime this evening. Very well, Olenna said, squeezing her granddaughter's hand reassuringly. I will return later, my dear. Thank you, grandmother, Margaery said tiredly before looking over at Tyrion. You as well, Lord Tyrion. Thank you for keeping my grandmother company. Tyrion gave the queen a slight bow. My pleasure, your grace. It was enlightening. We will leave you be. After Tyrion and Olenna were ushered out of the room, Olenna once again became the sharp-tongued Queen of Thorns, putting away the caring grandmother who had once been by the queen's side. I will look after my granddaughter, So long as you deal with the wildfire, Olenna said sharply as the odd duo walked away from the Queen's chambers. I will ensure that it is done, and done quietly. Tyrion promised. I will let you know when I have more to say. Thank you, Olenna said before the two parted ways. Jaime Lannister, Amy as well as the others around the table, could only sit back and look at the king with utter shock and sorrow. His plan, while plausible, and perhaps even possible, was risky, dangerous, and almost pure suicide. He had been blunt. Thankfully, and there was no misinterpreting his plan, nor his reasons behind it. That did not mean, however, that anyone around the table liked it. Robb, that's suicide, Garland said with surprising frankness. What you're proposing will get us all killed. But it may just save the realm, the king countered calmly. It's been brought to my attention that the others want me. Why not give them what they want? If we draw the others out, into the courtyard, then we can collapse the tunnel and worry strictly on the others.
How do we even know how many there are?
Lord Royce asked. There are 10 more, Bran Stark, the only odd member of the War Council, replied. Jaime hated looking at the boy. He was a constant reminder of just how far Jaime had fallen, as a man before Robb and Tyrion had given him a second chance. Pushing the boy out of that window had been one of the lowest moments in Jaime's life, coming close to when he shoved his sword into the Mad King's back. At the time he had been so blinded by his toxic love for Cersei, so confident that the boy would die, that he didn't care what he did. He had been numb, fixated only on his sister. How do you know this? Prince Oberyn asked. I have seen it, Bran replied simply in that same, unemotional tone that sent shivers down Demi's spine. I have been keeping watch for our enemy for far longer than any of you. I know how many others are left, and if we don't get them all, Septon Brennan asked. There's only one we need, Jon said. The Night King. Who? Lord Tarly asked. The leader of the White Walkers, Robb said. He's the one who made all the rest of his brethren by taking the babies of Craester's wives. Who? Oberyn asked. Neutral party, Mancerator grunted. Apparently he had been offering up his sons to the others, as some sort of way to appease them. He had 11 sons? Sarah Brynden asked. How many wives? He had a sick habit of marrying his daughters. Jon spat. He kept the girls and threw away the boys. He's dead now, thank the gods, but the damage is done. If we kill the Night King, we should hopefully destroy the rest of the others, as well as the remaining undead, Robb said, pushing the conversation forward. He is the source of their power on Earth. It's a long shot, Lord Tarly commented. Randall, surely you're not condoning this plot, Garland said, leaning forward and slamming his palm on the table. There has to be another way. But there isn't, Robb said grimly. I wish there were, Garland. I wish that there was another way to win this war. But we would only be delaying the inevitable. Eventually the first gate will fall, and then what? Night after night, we will be broken down like stone, under a pick, until a few brave souls remain. And when they are swept aside, the wall will soon fall. Then Winterfell and Moat Cailin. The Twins and River Run will not stop them, nor will the Eyrie high atop its mountain, or Casterly Rock in the west. The fields of the Reach will be frozen and stalks of wheat will be replaced with rotten bodies of the undead. The Stormlands will be overrun, and even the burning Dornish sun will be blotted out by these damn clouds. Robb gripped the table, staring fiercely at his good brother. King's Landing may last a day, perhaps even a week, if they are lucky. But eventually the gates will be broken, and the streets will be filled with rivers of death and destruction. The Red Keep will be washed with blood. The blood of my wife and son, of my friends and family. All who I love and care, all that we all hold dear in our hearts, will die. Robb, that's enough, Jon said, attempting to calm his brother. But the king merely shrugged aside the effort. You are my brother through marriage, Garland. And I care about you just as I do Jon, my father, and every man and woman around this table, Robb continued. Do not tell me that my plan is suicide or impossible. What I believe to be impossible is waiting for death to knock down our gate and take us all. I would rather invite death in and try to stab its fucking throat before I sit with my hand up my ass and wait for it. I would rather die trying to win rather than trying to not die. Too many depend on us. Damn it. We are not just fighting for those who are still alive, but those who have yet to even be born. We fight so that they can see the dawn. You say that my plan is suicide. Madness. Call it whatever you want, it is our only choice if we have any hope of surviving. Jaime was speechless. He had spent over 9 months on the wall with the king, as well as months in King's Landing, and never did he ever look so motivated. Several times Jaime had seen him determined, fearless, decisive, and utterly in control of his emotions, as well as the situation. Robb Stark had reminded Jaime of 2 men, Robert Baratheon and Jaime's father, Tywin Lannister. The young monarch had the boldness and the same inspiring leadership as the Stag King, while also possessing the iron-like will of Jaime's father. Robb Stark knew the risks that came with his plan. It's likely that he had been thinking about the plan for months as a last resort. He knew that he and others might die because of it, and there was a good chance that all of humanity would be wiped out if the plan didn't work. However, if the king's plan did work, then the world would be saved. Targaryen is right, Jaime said quietly, speaking for the first time. It's a long shot, and there's a good chance we'll all die and the world will become a frozen hellhole. What an astute observation, Prince Oberyn grunted darkly. Do you have any other insights, Lannister? Yes, I do, Jaime said, ignoring the sarcasm in the Dornishman's voice. The king is right, a fact none of us should find surprising. If he says that our only chance of winning is by destroying the power that gives White Walkers and Whites their unnatural life, then I believe him. If that means that we all have to sacrifice our lives to do so, then so be it. We all live very comfortable lives, a benefit of our high stations, but with those stations comes immense responsibility. He turned to Robb. You are willing to die for your people. No one here can deny that. I very much like living, especially since you are the one who allowed me to keep my life. But if you are willing to lay down your life, then I will stand by your side and do it too. I, who was once your enemy, and I, who was once your prisoner, have followed you without hesitation into the 7 hells and have raised my blade against the army of the undead. You have asked nothing of your men that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. Jaime bowed his head and became silent for a few moments. After a while, he began to chuckle and simply shook his head. Finally, he looked over at Lord Stark. I've begun to sound like you, Stark, Jaime said with a wry smile before he looked back at the king. What I'm trying to say is that you have led us this far, and if you think that we can win with your plan, then I, for one, see no reason to doubt you. You'll have my sword for as long as you need it, and for as long as I have breath in my lungs to wield it. Thank you, Jaime, the king said, nodding to the former knight. What of the rest of you? If you do not agree with my plan, then you are welcome to travel to another castle and fight there. You do not have to face the others head-on if you do not wish to. No, we don't, Jon said, looking around the table before turning back to his brother. But we're here, so we might as well. There was a low chuckle from the assembled warriors in response to the young man's words. Yobeni is right, which are words I never thought I'd be saying, Jon continued, glancing at the blonde-haired warrior. You would never ask us to make the ultimate sacrifice if you weren't willing to do the same. We'll follow you to the end, son, Lord Stark said. Each and every one of us. You can count on it. Any objections? Robb asked, looking around the table. When no one spoke in objection to his plan, he nodded once and brought the meeting to an end. Very well, we'll take today and tomorrow to make our final preparations, and then we'll open the gate. That will be all. Jaime followed the others outside while Lord Stark and Jon stayed with the king, most likely to have one final family moment together. You were right to say what you said, Sir Brendan said, as soon as Jaime left the room. The others had gone off to read reports, sleep, eat, or train, but the Blackfish had waited outside the door for Jaime. I decided to take a page from the Stark's book, Jaime shrugged, leaning against the railing and looking out over the courtyard. Speak from the heart with uncompromising truth and honesty. Aye, that's about all there's room for in there. The Blackfish agreed. I remember the boy who followed me around for a fortnight while he stayed in Riverrun, berating me with questions and asking me for stories every night. You were my hero. Jaime nodded. You were the Blackfish. A war hero. I wanted to be just like you, just like Ser Barristan the Bold and Ser Arthur Dayne. You all were the epitome of what knights were, strong, noble, courageous, and could do no wrong. I believed you could have been, but for a while I wasn't sure. Separate Brendan admitted. The things I do for love, Jaime muttered, before shaking his head. I wasn't the knight I could have been. I wasn't the man I should have been. Cersei, my father, the Mad King. I could blame a lot of people for the man I became, but the simple fact is that I allowed others to define me, to say who I should be. Robb Stark allowed me to choose who I wanted to be, something I will always be thankful for. We all thought he was mad, Sir Brynden said bluntly. Sparing not one, but two of his enemies. We couldn't believe it. Now we're here, and both you and the Targaryen girl have been integral to the defense of the wall. Maybe Robb Stark has more magic in him than we all thought. Jaime chuckled. Everything he touches seems to go right. Some people may just have that effect, Sir Brynden agreed. The two men watched the activity in the courtyard for a short while. Groups of men were hauling quivers of arrows up to the top of the wall while others hung quivers along the walkways and battlements. Knowing that soon the enemy would break through the gate, the pounding and screeching of metal could be heard coming from the armory. Lord Tarly and Lord Royce were checking over the defenses outside the last gate. Garland was sparring with Sir Robb, while Sir Balin and Sir Roland were helping the Baratheon brothers prepare for battle. Other warriors such as Alicent Mormont, Sir Rolles, her law, Lord Lentel Corbray, were all training as well. From a window that had been slightly cracked open, the singing of the children of the forest could be heard loud and clear throughout the courtyard, adding to the sights, smells, and sounds of the fortress. The humanoid children had accounted well for themselves during the battle months ago, bringing down several wights with their arrows and moving with breathtaking agility and speed with their spears. After the battle, their song had been mournful, as they grieved for their fallen brothers and sisters. Now their music was much more hopeful, reminding Jaime of better times. We may yet survive this, Jaime whispered.